Papyrus. What is papyrus? Papyrus is a grass-like aquatic plant that has woodly, bluntly triangular stems and grows up to 4.6 meters, which is about 15 feet high, in quietly flowing water up to 90 centimeters, which is 3 feet deep. Papyrus was a writing material of ancient times, and the plant from which it was derived, also called paper plant. The papyrus plant was long cultivated in the Nile Delta region in Egypt. It was collected for its stalk or stem, whose central pith was cut into thin strips, pressed together, and dried to form a smooth, thin writing surface. Here is a video showing the papyrus.
Discover Lindt Classic Recipe. Exceptionally smooth milk chocolate.
These guys in Egypt are the last ones in the world to make this ancient piece of paper. This is the piece of paper that the Egyptian pharaohs used, and it's about to go extinct. In the village of Al-Qaramous, Egypt, there are people who still make paper from ancient Egypt.
أنا سعيد طرحان أحد منتجي ورق البردي ورسام.
You see, 5,000 years ago, the pharaohs did not know how to make modern paper, but they needed something to write on. So they used the papyrus plant. This exact same plant was used for everything: to write letters, to make marriage contracts, and even to prepare shopping lists for the pharaohs.
صناعة البردي دي مهنة امتهناها من أكثر من 40 سنة. يعني من ضمن الإبداع في المجال اللي احنا فيه وصلنا إن احنا نوصل ورقة البرد المصنعة يدوياً إنها تدخل بريد.
As cheaper paper became more popular, papyrus became useless. But this village in Egypt decided to continue this tradition by making this paper. So exactly how do they make 5,000-year-old paper? They first cut the papyrus plant. They slice it into equal strips manually. Then they soak the strips to make them ferment over a day or two. And then they wash them. After that, every single strip is arranged by hand, yes, by hand, into vertical and horizontal layers. This is then dried for days and squeezed for days to create this paper.
احنا ممكن نطلع وحدات الفرد وحدات يطلع من 20 ل 25 ورقة اللي هو القيسري. كلمة بيبر أو بايبر من أصلها بردي.
Finally, this paper is sold to artists who make paintings on it like this and this for tourists to buy. This process is one of the last in the world, and it's very, very close to disappearing. Paper is becoming cheaper, and the only people that would buy this old paper style are the tourists who visit Egypt. But because of COVID-19, tourism has dropped by a lot, and these guys are struggling to get anyone to buy this paper. And today, only 25 acres of the papyrus farms remain.
ورق البردي وخدك ما بقاش فيه إقبال وخدك عليه لأنه بسبب الجائحة اللي أصابت العالم كله، ما أصابتش مصر بس. السياحة في مصر تمرض ولا تموت.
This is not just a job or a paper. For them, this is a way to keep a 5,000-year tradition alive.
هذه الحرفة غيرت فينا كل شيء. المهنة دي إيه؟ المهنة دي تاريخي. أنا وارث تاريخي عن أجدادي وإن شاء الله هورثها لأحفادي وأحفاد أحفادي. ده شرف لي. تاريخ أول حضارة عرفتها البشرية.
And this is exactly why, as tourists, we need to start buying more from local communities. It may not be obvious, but when we buy this papyrus paper, we can keep an entire family working, an entire village thriving, and a 5,000-year tradition alive.
Papyrus in the ancient Egypt. The Egyptians used the stem of the papyrus plant to make sails, cloth, mats, cords, and above all, the paper. The paper made from papyrus was the chief writing material in ancient Egypt. It was adopted by the Greeks and was used extensively in the Roman Empire. The paper made from the papyrus was not only used to produce books, but also for correspondence and legal documents. This brown part right here is the actual paper. You can tell how it's like a little bit crumbly and the edges aren't like so straight. And this black stuff that you see right here is the ink that they wrote in a calligraphy pen. When did Egypt invent papyrus? They invented papyrus around the 3000 BC. The Egyptians would revolutionize the literary world by producing a smooth, flexible writing material that could accept and retain ink without a blur or a smudge, which is pretty impressive for it being so in the early BCs. This material, papyrus, would remain in use for longer than any other material in the history of written documents. The papyrus symbolized? The papyrus plant was a symbol of rebirth. From these germs of creation, the Egyptians extracted the material on which they could create and record for millennia. The plant was also a symbol of Lower Egypt and its green and productive quality of food growing. The usage of the papyrus stem was also used to represent growth, youth, and all things fresh and new and growing. So they're saying that the whole plant is like a symbol of rebirth, which is like new and growing, and the stem was also used to represent new growth. How was papyrus made? The papyrus plant was a reed that grew along the Nile River. The stripes of the papyrus were laid out in 2 layers, one horizontal and one vertical, and pressed and dried to form a papyrus sheet. After they were formed to make a sheet, they were then joined end to end to form a roll. And I'm going to show you a video on how the papyrus was made. The Papyrus font. Papyrus is a widely typeface who was designed by Chris Costello. Chris was a graphic designer, illustrator, and web designer as well. He created the font in 1982. During this time, he was studying the Bible, and while he was studying the Bible, he wanted to know how a written font would look like in a biblical times in the Middle East. He wrote it over and over and over and over in a calligraphy pen with texture paper. His goal was to write a font that would represent what English language text would look like if it was written on papyrus. Papyrus has some side effects to it. It's rough edges, the irregular curves, and has high rough strokes. This right here is what the font looks like on the papyrus. This is what is written in the calligraphy pen. His font was so rough looking because the papyrus. The font was a Roman typeface that effectively merges the legacy of the traditional Roman letter form with the handcrafted look of highly skilled calligraphy. And here's a video of how to write
Welcome to
the
Learn to
font
Write in Different
in the
Fonts.
calligraphy pen.
Today's episode covers Papyrus. Follow the link in the video description to download a practice sheet and follow along. We'll start by tracing the letters to help break away from your previous handwriting influence. While it's best to use a chisel-tipped pen or pencil, the distinctive shape of papyrus can be acceptably reproduced with a round-tipped pen. Papyrus is a typeface based off of handwriting, but the goal of this exercise is still rigid approximation. Copy the letters slowly and carefully to avoid lapsing into your own handwriting style. It may be hard to keep your copied papyrus as distinct as the original, so take note of the shapes, which can be especially easy to abstract. The O and the Q are not just squished circles. Both harbor a distinctive egg shape. With its elegant but worn appearance, papyrus is often the first choice of those seeking a patina of ancient credibility or benign exoticism. With this appeal in mind, look for papyrus in mid-priced restaurant menus and fantasy settings. This latrine is for public house patrons only. Cloak sale this Saturday in Evergreen Shire. 7 a.m., no wizards. Now casting mygreatspell.exe. Let's finish the last part of the worksheet. Due to copyright restrictions regarding the reproduction of typeface names, this must be written by yourself. Now, I'll put my new muscle memories to good use by writing the credits. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.
Other uses of papyrus. Papyrus could be used in the manufacture of a variety of objects. Skiffs were made for the local transport and for hunting for their food. Boats were used for the pilgrimages and funerals as well. It was also used for construction items like mats, boxes, sandals, and ropes. This is a picture of the planned papyrus boat. And this is a video on how to make one. They're trying to make a boat to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Paper manufacturing going up. The papyrus plant continued through millennia and had still managed to survive while new competitions were coming out. The competitions around Egypt was the form of the parchment paper, which was made from animal skin. The parchment paper was supposed to be easily usable than the papyrus was. The papyrus was rougher and the parchment paper was smoother. This right here is a picture of the papyrus paper. You can see how it had like the rough edges, and if you see closely, the wrinkle of the paper wasn't so good, and that's what made the font kind of look a little bit funky on it. The oldest papyrus. The oldest papyrus was the Diary of Myrrh. The papyrus jarve is what they had called it. Was the papyrus logbooks written over 4,500 years ago by Myrrh. In his diary, he wrote his daily activities about him and his crew. He wrote the logbooks all the same, and they all started off with the month and the seasons. They say that his diary was one of the greatest discoveries in Egypt in the 21st century. And here's a video of the Diary of Myrrh.
The Diary of Myrrh is a text written over 4,500 years ago that describes the daily life of workers who took part in the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza. In 2013, the text was found in a cave in Wadi al-Jarf written with hieroglyphs and hieratic on papyrus. These papyri are the oldest ever found. The Diary of Myrrh is from the 27th year of the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. The text describes 3 months of work with the transportation of limestone from Torah to Giza. The Diary of Myrrh is the first historical reference that describes the daily life of the people that worked with the molding of the Great Pyramid. The Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass describes the text as the greatest discovery in Egypt in the 21st century. The papyrus is shown at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo.
And that was the Diary of Myrrh, which is like the oldest papyrus. Discovering papyrus. Excavated of the tomb of Saqqara discovered the earliest roll of papyrus around the 2900 BC. It was still being used until the 11th century AD, even just as paper. In Egypt, text could be written on papyrus in Demotic script, and later after that, it was used in the Greek as well. And this is my works cited. Thank you.